offering plate. We'll just put it down there on the sidewalk there after the service. And so if you want to drop your tithe or offering in there, we'll have that available at the end. And want to thank you again for those that have been mailing in those contributions, those tithes and offerings. We do appreciate it and want to give God thanks for how he's providing for each and every one of us here. This morning we're going to be wrapping up our series on the names of God. I hope this has been a beneficial series, that you have gotten something from it, that God has hopefully used it to work inside your heart and your life. We have celebrated the way that God reveals himself in all kinds of different ways. Pastor Bethany started back all the way at the beginning of this series talking about God as Yahweh, as I am. That everything that we know, everything we see, relies and finds its source in God. We talked about God as Jehovah Nissi, my banner. That God does amazing and wonderful things when we will lift him up high and say that who we are as people depends on who God is. We've talked about God as Jehovah Shammah, that God is there, God is present. That God is Jehovah Rapha, God is our healer. And last week, Pastor Bethany talked about Jehovah Mekadishkin. Did I do that right? All right, we'll see. That God is our sanctifier. Today we are going to wrap up this series, and we're going to talk about God as Jehovah Jireh, my provider. And I think of all the ones we've done, I think this one is really easy to be able to relate to. Because we've all had times whenever God has provided for us. We could probably sit here till sunset and have a testimony time and share about the different ways that God has provided for us. For those times whenever God helped us to make it to that next paycheck, however that looked. Whenever God took that anxiety or that fear and was able to remove it and fill us with his peace. Whenever God provided an answer of prayer for healing. I hope you've been able to have some of those instances where the doctor said, we don't know what happened. I don't know. It's not because of anything we did, but we know that it is God who is able to heal. Now, God provides in some of these big ways. These big ways that are just so amazing and so wonderful, but God also provides in some of the little things. We were talking this week as a family and trying to remind one another of being thankful about some of the little things. Each night when we are winding down for the day and having family prayer time, one of the things we do is to say what we're thankful for. And sometimes I think our kids are trying to think of something new and original, but we were just reminded this week, sometimes we can give God thanks because he provided those things we take for granted. Clothes on our back, a place to live, air conditioning that works, and we have food to eat every day. And so God provides for us all along the way. And today I want us to look at a week in the life of Abraham, to see how God provided for him, not just in the big ways, but in some of the ways all along the journey. If you have a Bible with you and you want to turn over to Genesis chapter 22, we'll look at verses 1 through 14. Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. I'll give you a chance to find that in your Bibles. verse 1 starts with, sometime after these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am. He said, God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him up there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will indicate to you. Early in the morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his young servants with him, along with his son Isaac. When he had cut the wood for the burnt offering, he started out for the place God had spoken to him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham caught sight of the place in the distance. So he said to his servants, you 2 stay here with the donkey, while the boy and I go up there. We will worship and then return to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. Then he took the fire and the knife in his hand, and the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father? What is it, my son? Here's the fire and the wood, Isaac said. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Abraham replied, and the 2 of them continued on together. When they came to the place God had told him about, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood on it. Next, he tied up his son Isaac and placed him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife, and prepared to slaughter his son. But the Lord's angel called to him from heaven, Abraham! Abraham! Here I am, he answered. Do not harm the boy, the angel said. Do not do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, because you did not withhold your son, your only son, from me. Abraham looked up and saw behind him a ram caught in the bushes by its horns. So he went over and got the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord provides. It is said to this day, in the mountain of the Lord, provision will be made. This is the word of the Lord for us today. Thanks be to God. The writer here starts off this part of Abraham's life by saying, sometime after these things, God tested Abraham. Now, anytime we see this, anything like sometime after these things or therefore, that's just that indication that we need to make sure that we go back and look at what has come before that passage we're looking at to see what the context is. Help us get those clues that we're going to need and to see what it is that we need to hear. Now, in Abraham's life leading up to this chapter, his story starts back in Genesis chapter 12. As Abraham walked with God, they had some ups and downs in their relationship. They had some good times where he just showed out great faith, trusted God to know what he was doing, and sometimes Abraham just fell down miserably. I think we can relate to that. We see in Abraham's story, he had some of those moments where he didn't trust God, where he wanted to do things his way or on his timetable. Think first of Isaac. God had promised to Abram and Sarai before they got to change their names, hey, I am going to give you a son, even in your old age. Now, at first, Sarah laughed. She thought this was a hilarious thing that God had said. And over the years, as year and year and year passed, they waited, and God hadn't provided it yet. They tried along the way with their own plan. Hey, let's have Sarah's servant Hagar try to provide a descendant for Abraham. And eventually, the story in Genesis shows Hagar and Ishmael being sent out into the wilderness. God provided for them. On two different instances, Abraham was worried that when they were first in Egypt and then in one of the lands of the Philistines, he was worried that they were going to kill him because of his beautiful wife Sarah. So they said that they were brother and sister, and that caused all kinds of trouble. So times along the way, Abraham tried to do things his way on his timetable. And so here in this passage, God is providing Abraham with another opportunity to grow in spiritual maturity, giving him another chance. God, this is a first way we see in this passage of God providing. Not exactly what we always want to have. We like when God provides us with things like food, shelter, clothing, the fun things. Not so much whenever God provides those opportunities for us to grow in our faith. But nonetheless, here we are. God wanted to see, had Abraham grown? Had he learned anything from those past mistakes and missteps? Sometimes God brings you back around to a crossroads where maybe you didn't make the right choice the last time, and God's giving you that second opportunity to try to make the choice that he wants you to make this time. When God does this, even in our lives, God needs to help us to grow in him, to be able to be better equipped to grow in maturity so that we can be a spiritual mentor to another Christ follower, or to grow in our faith that we might trust him more. If you think about it this way, if somebody gives you a watering can and you're supposed to fill it up with water, walk out to the garden or the flowers and water them, but your watering can is all banged up, it's got holes in the sides and on the bottom, it's rusty on the parts, and it's about to ready to fall apart. You can fill it all the way up to the top. You're not going to make it out to those flowers with very much water left. God provides times of testing sometimes, or uses the circumstances that we're already in to help us to grow so that we can have that watering can that's able to hold that water so that God can pour out his blessings and provisions for others. So God called Abraham. Abraham, I want you to take your son, the one that I promised to give you, the son that you waited a long time for. I want you to take him. I'm going to send you out on a journey, and I'm going to ask you to sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. So Abraham took that step of faith. He gathered up the provisions they were going to need. It was going to be a 3-day journey. Gathered up everything they needed. Got 2 of his younger servants. Got everything they needed, saddled up the donkey, and away they went on their journey. That must have been a long, hard road. Sounds like that first time we meet Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12. When God said, hey, I need you to leave your father's household and everything that is familiar to you, and I need you to go out to a land that I'll show you. You'll know it when you get there. I'll make sure to point it out to you. And Abraham, by faith, not knowing what was going on ahead of him, was willing to go to where God wanted him to be. As Abraham went along on this particular journey, God made sure to provide for what he needed. They were going to need a pack animal to carry all their provisions. They needed the food and supplies. God provided the things that they were going to need for the journey. God even, so far as we know, provided them with a safe journey to get there. And in that day and time, going out through the middle of nowhere, that wasn't always guaranteed. maybe even along that journey, God helped Abraham to remember that very first trip that they had made together. When God provided a way for him and helped him to reach Canaan and provided places for him to stay, provided him with protection. And I hope we can see here, that even so far in this story, that whenever God calls you and I to do something, to go somewhere, to take a next step of faith, that God provides what we need to take that step. Because God knows that we're not there yet. That's why he's helping us to grow. And so he's going to help us to get there if we're willing to receive that help and allow God to do that work in us to be able to make it there. As the trip went on, Isaac was a smart boy. He wasn't a dummy. He looked around. He knew they had just about everything they needed, but there was no lamb. There was no animal for them to sacrifice. Maybe he had seen and observed his dad earlier on in years before, whenever there was a sacrifice, whenever he did give an offering up to God. He had seen all the things that they needed, all the things they did, and as he looked around, something was missing. There was no lamb. So he says, Dad, did you forget something? Now, I think we missed something pretty important here. Where's the lamb? That is a tough conversation. But Abraham here didn't try to fudge an answer, didn't try to make something up. He said with all truth and seriousness, God will provide. God will provide. He trusted that God was going to take care of this. God had provided for him all those years along the way. He had not failed once. And so he was going to take God at his word. He said, God's going to provide something. Don't know what, don't know how, but God is going to provide. They got close to Moriah. So Abraham asked the servants to wait where they were, and Abraham and Isaac went on up the mountain. Abraham began those preparations. He placed the wood on the altar, got everything ready, tied up Isaac, placed him on that altar, and prepared what must have been hard to even do and get up to that point. Abraham was willing to give up the most important person to him. He was showing a willingness to give up what he wanted, to give up his ways, his timetable, in order to put God first. To trust God to be who he had revealed himself to be. And in that moment, that voice shouted out from heaven, "Wait! Do not harm the boy. Don't do anything. Now I know that you fear God." God observed Abraham's faith and obedience and the willingness to go with what God wanted in God's ways, on God's timetable. When we have those kinds of hearts that are open up to what God wants completely and fully, God is able to do amazing things. We are willing to be his. But all throughout this journey and this trip leading up to that final part, to experience and to receive God's provision, Abraham had to walk in faithful obedience to God. If he had not, he would have missed out. Makes me wonder some of those times when I haven't trusted God completely, when I've tried to do things my way or on my own timetable or my own strength. What have I missed out on? So what does God's provision require of us? This passage shows us, I saw three things that it shows to us about what God's provision requires. First, it requires our obedience. For us to have that reverent fear of God. To obey God. When God says go, we go. When God says jump, we jump. When God says, hey, I need you to help so-and-so over there. Whenever God says, hey, I want you to give such and such in the offering plate. I want you to fill in the blank. God calls us to obey. Because if we don't, we won't be able to see God provide for those needs in other people's lives. We will miss out on seeing God provide for us when we do give. God's provision requires patience and persistence, that we're willing to keep going when the times get difficult, that we keep on trusting, we keep on obeying in the day-to-day of life, even when we don't see the immediate results. And God's provision requires us to submit to Him, that we're willing to give up having our way. There's a song I've been listening to lately. Is a Christian artist. Her name's Audrey Assad, and it just talks about, deliver me, God, deliver me from these things that hinder me from being completely yours. And she talks about some of these things like, deliver me from my desire, my need to be understood, my need to have my way so that I can experience your goodness. Whenever I was preparing for this sermon, looking at this passage, I was able to see God doing this kind of thing in my life. I've been working at Tractor Supply for almost 3 years now. And until recently, I've had the crazy schedules, you don't know whenever your schedule's going to happen, change at the last minute, of not being able to have weekends, and all kinds of other things. And after a while, I just had enough. And so I started looking for anything that gave a steady schedule, something, the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, something. Lots of times I'd put in that application, I'd send that resume, didn't hear anything. Or I'd go get a job interview, I'd go and they say, hey,